It's been 2 years since the S5IIX was released, so I'm going to give you my honest opinion after seeing the good, the bad, and the ugly. And as always, we're going to start with the autofocus. Alright, the cat's out the bag. Lumix finally caught up in the autofocus department. In my own experience, I've found the autofocus to be extremely sticky, and it's yet to let me down. Especially coming from the GH5 and the S1H, because those things couldn't focus on a barn door if they tried, so this thing's working. I always say coming from those older Lumix cameras that you're basically just going to focus puller boot camp. Honestly, not complaining, made me a pretty sick focus puller, so maybe it's just doing you a service. But now I can confidently say that for the last 2 years, I've been able to use autofocus when I need it, when I'm not using Cineglass, and I could just reliably trust this camera, so you could definitely trust it. It doesn't matter if the subject's fast or stationary, I know it's not gonna let me down. Next, we're talking about low light. If you're anything like me and you find yourself shooting in low light situations, if you shoot in log, you have two base ISOs of 640 and 4000. So pairing that 4000 base ISO with like a 1.4 or 1.8, you can basically see in the dark. I've taken this thing into so many dark situations, and honestly, it just works. We're suckers for high contrast scenes around here, so if you're familiar with my work, you know I like shooting in darker areas, so. We spoke about color last year, and my feelings haven't changed about it at all. You can push and pull these 10-bit codecs to the brink without them breaking on you. And if you love pushing your colors to the brink like me, then this sucker might be for you. You can mold these images to your desire, and the highlight recovery on this thing is absolutely bonkers. Bonkers to the point where sometimes it feels like a cheat code. You could also use the curve tools and just bring down the highlight tail end of it, or you could use the HDR tools for the highlights and just bring it down and it'll recover stuff for you. Now let's talk about proxy recording. Alright, this one has saved my butt more than you can imagine. I had to film an event last year where I had to have same-day deliverables, and let's just say my computer isn't really the best, and if I didn't have this proxy recording feature inside of my camera, I would have been kind of screwed. So this camera basically turned my editing session from an all-night thing to just a couple of hours. But side note, check out how cool these banners came out for the event. If you're in the strength world, you'll probably recognize these two faces of Eddie Hall and Brad Shaw, so it's pretty cool to see them. One of my biggest cons when I first got this camera was how light it was. I truly just didn't like it at all, and it felt like a feather in my hand. But I'll admit it, I was wrong. Because this thing, after I rigged it, was the perfect weight inside of my hands, and honestly, if it was any heavier, I would probably start having some back pain. So this is the perfect size now, and I take that back. I've been rigging this thing with the DJI Focus Pro and the Blaze R45, and I even took that thing up into the mountains of Scotland, and I was able to carry all that stuff in my hand, and I wasn't fatigued. So just to give you an idea of how much you could rig this thing out and, you know, be all right. Now let's talk about the anamorphic D-squeeze. Now that anamorphic lenses are becoming more affordable for everyone, this anamorphic D-squeeze is going to be super important for a lot more people now. And for the longest, Lumix has had this built into their cameras, and they were just ahead of the curve because now anamorphic glass is getting cheaper and people with Lumixes are just walking right in. You could de-squeeze your anamorphic glass from 1.3x all the way up to 2x. And the de-squeeze isn't just through a monitor, you could de-squeeze right in camera and see it from the LCD. And the look that comes out of the S5IIX with anamorphic glass is just gorgeous. And as always, I've been talking only positively about this camera, but now let's talk about some cons and some things that I found myself actually not using after 2 years. Which aren't necessarily cons, it's just things that I ended up not using. Okay, so one of the biggest cons that I had when I first got this camera was rolling shutter, and since then, it's become this huge talking point about how bad the rolling shutter is in this camera and yada yada. But what I failed to notice is that I was shooting everything strictly in 6K, and in 6K open gate, that's when you get the worst rolling shutter. But what I failed to notice until after I reviewed the camera is that the rolling shutter gets better after you reduce the resolution to around 4K, or if you go into APS-C mode, so it gets better, honestly. But after time's gone on, none of my clients have noticed, and I shoot sports and I whip the camera to get more energetic shots, and nobody's ever noticed. The only people that notice are pixel peepers like you and I, and honestly, I'm not going to go into APS-C mode just to be able to get better rolling shutter. If I need a better camera for that, I'll just rent it. But for everything that I've done yet, it hasn't really affected me. So whatever, stop complaining about it. I'll stop complaining about it. It's not that deep. But yeah, I just want you to know that it's there, but it gets better. Now let's talk about the image stabilization in anamorphic mode. This might have been user error, but don't discount it yet because I used the image stabilization with the Blaze R45, and I started getting some wobbling and jelloing around the edges of the frame. And if you use like ultra wide lenses on any Lumix camera with the image stabilization, there's a certain focal length where the edges begin to jello, but I started getting that jelloing effect around the edges of the frame. I'm assuming it's just because the image is wider, the same thing as if you have a wide focal length. Don't discount it. I ended up turning it off on my trip. I also was hiking through tons of mountains, so you know, I'm taking big steps and I could have just been pushing it way too long. So if you end up shooting anamorphic with the image stabilization, make sure you check your shots before you keep going through your shoot to make sure things are all right. But if you've had any issues or if you have any idea what could have been, leave the comments below. I'm all ears. And now let's talk about things that I found myself not using after 2 years. And I'm not going to go in depth on these. I'm just going to quick fire. I didn't find myself using B-roll at all because I don't feel like buying a new monitor. And honestly, I like getting things correctly in camera. And if there's a white balance change or whatever, I could just do that in color or post. And I don't really need like 12-bit and all that stuff. So I don't want to buy another monitor, and I kind of don't like how the Blackmagic monitor looks on top either. So yeah, I found myself not using that too often, actually at all. The next one I found myself not using after some time as much is the SSD recording. And that one's gonna feel like a slap in the face because I talked about that one so much when this camera first came out. And after some time, around like the year mark, maybe a year and a couple months, I completely stopped using it because just mounting the SSD was an absolute pain. And honestly, I don't really shoot in too high of frame rates or codecs, I mean, so I really didn't have to use the SSD like that. It was convenience. I still use it occasionally. I love it, but the best solution I could get is the SSD top handle, but then I'm nitpicky. I don't like top handles, so I think I'm just being a diva, if I'm being honest. The one that I found myself not using at all was the TIime LUT. And all my peers love this feature. They just put their LUTs in and they just have their DNA into their thing. But I always like building my stuff from scratch. It's just my workflow. So I think that's why I've never really used it. I use the app to transfer stuff into my phone, and then I tinker with it and then make it look how I want. But like straight out of camera, just and posting it, I don't use it at all. All right, so that's my review after 2 years of strictly using this camera. But remember, what really matters is what you put in front of the lens, because if you have a better gun, you're not a better shot. So find the tool that works best for you. If this seems like it's best for you, pick it up. It's definitely worth the price. So yeah, I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.